Picture this. It's May 13th, 1940. A German general stands on a hilltop overlooking the Meuse River in France, watching through binoculars as his tanks, hundreds of them, pour across pontoon bridges under heavy fire. Explosions ripple through the columns. The French artillery is finding its range. His staff officers are sweating, begging him to halt the advance, to wait for infantry support. But Heinz Guderian doesn't flinch. He lights a cigar and says 5 words that will change the course of World War II. "I'm going forward with them." And he does. He climbs into a command tank and crosses that bridge himself, leading from the front as the entire French defensive line begins to collapse. Within 2 weeks, his panzer divisions will reach the English Channel, splitting the Allied armies in two and forcing the evacuation at Dunkirk. Military analysts will call it impossible. Historians will call it genius. But here's what most people don't know. The man who revolutionized modern warfare wasn't supposed to be a tank commander at all. He stumbled into it almost by accident, and the same iron will that made him a legend would eventually bring him into direct conflict with Adolf Hitler himself, with consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This is the story of Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, the general who changed warfare forever, and the man who had to live with what he helped create. Heinz Wilhelm Guderian was born in 1888 into a family of minor Prussian nobility. His father was an army officer, competent, unremarkable, traditional. Young Heinz was expected to follow the same path: join the infantry, serve the Kaiser, die gloriously if necessary, standard-issue Prussian military career, and that's exactly what he did. In World War I, Guderian served as a communications officer, not a tank commander, not even infantry. He spent most of the war dealing with telephones and radios behind the lines. While other German officers were earning Iron Crosses in the trenches, Guderian was solving problems about signal wire and radio frequencies. Most people would call that boring. Guderian called it revelation. See, while everyone else was focused on the carnage of trench warfare, Guderian was seeing something different. He was watching information move, or more accurately, watching it fail to move. Orders arrived hours late. Infantry attacks happened without artillery support because no one could communicate in real time. Entire offensives collapsed because generals had no idea what was happening on the battlefield. And then one day, he saw a tank, the British Mark IV, slow, primitive, breaking down constantly. Most German officers laughed at them, clumsy metal boxes that barely worked. But Guderian didn't see what they were. He saw what they could become. Here was a machine that could cross trenches, break through barbed wire, and survive machine gun fire. But more importantly, and this is what everyone missed, here was a weapon that could carry radios, a weapon that could move and communicate at the same time. After Germany's defeat in 1918, Guderian found himself in a shattered army of only 100,000 men. The Treaty of Versailles banned Germany from having tanks entirely. His career should have ended there. Instead, it began. Throughout the 1920s, Guderian became obsessed. He read everything he could find about armored warfare. British theorists like J.F.C. Fuller and Basil Liddell Hart, whose own countries were ignoring them. He studied, he experimented, he wrote. And here's the irony: the British invented the tank. They had the theorists, they had the experience, but they couldn't see past their own traditions. Their generals tucked tanks away as infantry support weapons, scattered them in small packets, chained them to the walking speed of foot soldiers. Guderian saw something else entirely. He envisioned massed formations of tanks, hundreds of them, supported by motorized infantry, mobile artillery, and aircraft, all moving together in coordinated strikes, not breaking through enemy lines to let the infantry walk forward. No, punching through and then racing ahead, 50, 60, 100 kilometers deep, faster than the enemy could react. Cut their supply lines, surround their armies, paralyze their command structure. Win the battle in days, not years. He called it Schwerpunkt, the concept of concentrated force at a decisive point. But history would remember it by a different name: Blitzkrieg, lightning war. German officers hated it. They called him a radical, a fantasist. One general told him he was proposing tank nonsense. The cavalry officers were particularly offended. Their beloved horses replaced by machines. Unthinkable. But then Hitler came to power, and Hitler loved tanks. Here's where Guderian's story gets complicated. Because Hitler gave him everything he needed: the budget, the resources, the political backing to build the panzer divisions. In 1935, Guderian published Achtung, Panzer, laying out his theories. By 1939, he commanded the 19th Army Corps, an entire formation built around his revolutionary ideas. The question that haunts his legacy: could he have achieved any of this without the Nazis? Poland, 1939. Guderian's tanks crossed the border on September 1st. The Polish cavalry, yes, actual horses, don't stand a chance. In 18 days, Poland ceases to exist. But Poland was the rehearsal. France was the performance. May 1940. Everyone expects Germany to repeat World War I's plan: a massive sweep through Belgium. The French position their best armies there, waiting. It's exactly what Guderian is counting on. Instead, his panzers drive through the Ardennes forest, terrain the French have deemed impassable for tanks. They emerge at Sedan, at the Meuse River, at the weakest point in the French line. Remember that scene from the opening? Guderian personally leading his tanks across the river. That actually happened. His superiors were furious. A corps commander had no business on the front line. But Guderian understood something they didn't. In mobile warfare, you have to lead from where the action is. You can't wait for reports to filter up the chain of command. In 7 days, his panzers advance 240 miles. The French command structure simply cannot process what's happening fast enough. They're still planning counterattacks against German positions that were abandoned days ago. One French general, seeing the reports, suffers a nervous breakdown. "I am beaten," he says. "I am unable to react." That was the whole point. But here's where the story turns. Guderian's greatest strength, his absolute certainty in his own methods, became his fatal weakness. He didn't just think he was right. He knew it, with the kind of bone-deep conviction that makes men heroes or corpses. When Hitler started interfering with military operations, Guderian didn't stay quiet. He argued. He pushed back, loudly. During the invasion of France, Hitler actually ordered him to halt his advance, fearing the tanks were overextended. Guderian threatened to resign. He won that argument, barely. Russia was different. In December 1941, with his panzers frozen in the snow outside Moscow, Guderian ordered a retreat to save his men from encirclement. Hitler had issued explicit orders: no retreat, fight where you stand. Guderian retreated anyway. Hitler relieved him of command. The architect of Germany's greatest victories was dismissed like a failed clerk. For 2 years, Guderian sat at home, while his revolutionary tactics were bungled by lesser commanders. The irony is almost unbearable. He created the weapon, but he wasn't allowed to wield it. Hitler brought him back in 1943, but in a staff position. Then, in 1944, after the failed assassination attempt against Hitler, Guderian became chief of the General Staff. But by then, the war was already lost. No amount of tactical genius could conjure men, fuel, or weapons from thin air. Guderian found himself in a nightmare, watching Hitler's increasingly delusional orders destroy what remained of the German army while being powerless to stop it. The arguments became volcanic. In meetings, Guderian would scream at Hitler, something few men dared to do twice. He survived only because Hitler still half respected him, and perhaps because the Führer's regime was too busy collapsing to execute its own generals. In March 1945, Hitler finally dismissed him for good. 6 weeks later, Germany surrendered. Heinz Guderian died in 1954, a free man who had never been convicted of war crimes. That fact troubles people. It should. After the war, Guderian wrote his memoirs, Panzer Leader, painting himself as a purely professional soldier who just happened to serve a monstrous regime. He had opposed Hitler's strategic decisions, he argued. He had focused only on military matters. He wasn't political. But that's not quite true, is it? He accepted Hitler's patronage. He led armies in wars of aggression. His tactics, while brilliant, served genocidal ends. The Blitzkrieg that brought him glory also delivered half of Europe into Nazi hands. And yet, every modern army on Earth studies Guderian's tactics. The Americans, the British, the Russians, the Israelis, they all learned from his methods. The tank doctrine that dominated the late 20th century, massed armor, rapid mobile warfare, combined arms. That's Guderian's legacy. When American tanks raced across Iraq in 1991 and 2003, they were executing principles he had laid out in 1937. So how do we remember Heinz Guderian? As a genius? Undoubtedly. As a revolutionary? Absolutely. As a moral man? That's the question that refuses to die. Perhaps the truth is this. Guderian was a man who saw the future of warfare with perfect clarity. He understood how technology could transform the battlefield, how speed and communication could replace brute force, how wars could be won in weeks instead of years. What he couldn't see, or chose not to see, was the larger war he was really fighting. The moral war. The one that matters more than tactics or strategy or battlefield brilliance. He changed warfare forever, but he did it for the wrong side. And that's the tragedy of Heinz Guderian. He was a brilliant man who built the perfect weapon, handed it to monsters, and then spent the rest of his life trying to explain that he was only interested in how the weapon worked. History remembers him as the father of modern armored warfare, but it can't decide whether that makes him a pioneer or a cautionary tale. Maybe he's both.